everyone. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to ChefConf 2021. My name is Alan Baptista. I'm a product marketing manager here at Progress Chef. I am honored to have an esteemed panel of panelists, of speakers that will be presenting today. We will be talking about the DevSecOps kind of roundtable conversation with question and answers. And ultimately, we want to get to answer the question, why is automation, why does it matter, and why it's so important? So I have the pleasure of having AJ, co-founder and CEO at BiteCheck, Chris Hughes, CISO and co-founder at Acquia. And forgive me if I mangled your company name, but Chris Medina is our Director of Public Sector Practice here at Progress Chef. AJ, why don't you introduce yourself, give your elevator spiel, and tell me who you are and why you think you're here.
Yeah, I appreciate being on here, and always enjoy talking with you, Alan, and both Chris's as well. I think we have almost the full service represented here, all the military branches. So I'm AJ Yan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of BiteCheck. Been in the cybersecurity industry for a little over a decade. Spent some of that time in the U.S. Army, and then went into cybersecurity compliance consulting, where I performed hundreds of compliance assessments for startups, mid-sized companies, Fortune 100 companies, and realized compliance sucks. So I launched BiteCheck to make compliance suck less. And we built a tool that helps automate a lot of this stuff. And I think I bring in an interesting perspective from both the auditor angle and then now a founder of a software tool to help automate some of this. Sit on a few boards and have a few AWS certs as well. And I'm a SANS associate instructor for a course called Continuous Automation for Enterprise and Cloud Compliance. So thanks for having me on. Really excited about the conversation.
Yeah, I always enjoy the conversations that we have, AJ. So thanks for making time for this, and appreciate all the insight that we're about to spiel out to the crowd. Chris Hughes, Chris H, why don't you do the same? Tell me who you are, what's this new gig you got going, and why do you think you're here?
Yeah, so Chris Hughes, coming up on actually almost 20 years of cyber experience at this point, and recently co-founded a company called Acquia, focusing on cloud, DevSecOps, and cybersecurity within the federal environment, both on the federal civilian and the DoD side. But as I mentioned, almost 20 years of experience. I was former active duty Air Force. I was a Navy civilian doing cloud security and cloud migrations for about 4.5 years. Also worked for a federal agency called GSA as the Joint Authorization Board for federal cloud consumption, basically approving federal cloud for federal consumption. I also teach as an adjunct at two universities, Capital Technology University and University of Maryland Global Campus, and their graduate cybersecurity programs. And I'm pretty active in the community with groups like Cloud Security Alliance, Cloud Native Computing Foundation. I actually have a podcast called Resilient Cyber. And yeah, I'm pretty passionate about all things cloud and cloud security. You can find me being active on LinkedIn.
So we have compliance, we have security, and then obviously we have a chef representative. So none last, but definitely not least, my resident guru, all things security, Chris Medina.
Hey, Alan, thanks again. I appreciate it. Hi, folks. My name is Chris Medina. I lead the federal practice here, the U.S. Public Sector practice for Progress under the Chef product line, and I've been in the business for about 27 years now. I was a U.S. Navy security officer. I've worked with a ton of three-letter agencies employing or deploying SOC operations, security operations center stand-up frameworks, all the processes that go in there with it. I've also worked with big companies like Cisco and Dell and implemented, security solutions and all types of other things, but super excited to be here. This is a great panel. We've worked together before in the past, and it's always real exciting to be back with these gentlemen. So thanks for having me.
Great. Yeah, and I'm just the mere moderator. What do I know about this thing? So I'll just help kind of corral the questions and make sure we stay on time. Again, thank you, gentlemen, for participating, representing. Thanks for your service all around, and thanks for what we're about to dish out here. So, DevSecOps. Let's not stop. Let's not beat around the bush any longer. What does it mean? And more importantly, how is compliant a part of this DevSecOps practice? AJ, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So DevSecOps to me is all about the philosophy. It's all about the mindset, how you're thinking about security early on in the process. A lot of times organizations will run out and care about spending a ton of money before they think about what exactly is DevSecOps at their organization. What does it actually mean? And good security always requires context. So you should be thinking about how does this fit in my organization based off of my tech stack, et cetera. But to me, it's a philosophy. It's making decisions and educating your users and operators, engineers, et cetera, to think about security earlier on in the process. And when we're specifically talking about developing web applications or software tools like we do here at ByteCheck, that's earlier on in the development process. It's incorporating security and thinking about it. And I like this graphic because you see security is kind of just wrapped around the entire cycle. And that to me is really what DevSecOps is. And every single phase as you go through developing something or just doing anything in your organization, there's a security mindset being taken place. And from a compliance perspective, I think DevSecOps has been missed. Compliance professionals have kind of just, dodged it a little bit, did the matrix trick when they hear the DevSecOps terms, they run the other way. And I think we need to have more compliance professionals, more talks like this, where DevSecOps is considered for compliance, because compliance is supposed to be for security, right? You're supposed to be able to improve your security, but it's kind of turned into this check the box. But that's because we're not doing these DevSecOps things. We're not thinking about it from how do we actually improve our environment? And then once we start doing that from a security perspective, how do we prove it to an auditor or to whoever else is coming through? And more the way that we traditionally think about things are how do we prove it to the auditor? Doesn't matter if it's securing anything, doesn't matter if it's going to benefit the organization. It's just like, let me just get this evidence to this auditor, internal or external, so he or she can get away from me and I can go back to doing what I'm doing. But what we would want to see in DevSecOps from a compliance perspective is let's actually start doing some control checks earlier on. Let's start monitoring some of this stuff early on. So again, it's just a mindset shift to where I'm not going to wait until my application's deployed before I start thinking about compliance. I'm going to think about it at the beginning when we're writing requirements. And that's to me what it's all about. It's all about between the two eyes, what you're thinking about more so than what you're using out there.
Much more than just going through the motions, right? Is really active participation, I think, is kind of one aspect that I think DevOps has instituted in the organizations. And now where we talk about, okay, why not include security in that conversation as well? Because the impact of not having a security or a secure environment is impacting the organization, be it at any stage of a DevOps kind of practice. So why not include it? It's not just another term that we're attaching to DevOps, but it is truly being that active participant in bringing value to the organization overall, period, full stop, right? Hughes, what's your perspective as the security guy there, dealing with compliance and, oh my gosh, here we go, another audit. Oh my God, another checkbox, some time away from my productive time. How do you see DevSecOps playing in your kind of little world?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things AJ said are things that resonate with me, which is no surprise because me and AJ think a lot alike. I think that, DevSecOps at a high level, without getting too technical, is about breaking down the silos between the security team and the operations team to basically expedite delivery of value to the organization. And a reason I think we've seen the evolution of the term is because initially security wasn't a focus of that paradigm shift. And we're now realizing that delivering something fast that's insecure is not delivering value. Delivering something that's secure fast is delivering value, right? And I think that, as an industry, there's a lot of room for innovation around this too. Like AJ said, we always kind of think of adding compliance after the fact. But there's a lot of technologies and innovations around cloud and infrastructure as code, compliance as code, things of that nature that you can bake in, those compliance things from the beginning. And then if you look at, the ability of DevOps to deliver fast, if you have a, control deviation, for example, you can remediate that very quickly by using DevOps practices and technologies. So I think that we're starting to see this paradigm shift of moving towards broader DevSecOps and bringing compliance along with that. It's just like anything, it takes time. It's kind of a maturation process.
Well, thank you. Medina, how do you see what are some of the benefits that you see out there with some of our customers and clients that have kind of started that direction, that journey of a DevSecOps journey. What are some of the benefits you've seen some of the customers get there?
Um, so that's a good question, Alan. There's a ton of people out there who went straight to market with automation for the sole purpose of being able to implement security quickly, right? And soon they found that, just being able to get in and make changes on the fly or at will got to be not only a slower process because they were breaking dependencies and they were putting themselves at risk more, but the use of automation really helped them speed up part of the process when shifting more to the left. And so I like what AJ was saying about the philosophy of this, right? This is a, and the way I look at this is it's a dance, and the way you look at the way this flow rolls around, this is an age-old dance that we've done forever, right? We've got security baseline, we've got controls we need to implement, we've got to be able to modulate and or manipulate the systems as our adversaries figure out new ways to penetrate and infiltrate. And so it's just a constant flow and never ending, battle between, hey, how can I, improve the baseline, or how can I think ahead of what the next thing is going to be? And so the customer comes back to, hey, if I can implement this, the faster I can implement this, the quicker I can be to market, the quicker I can get, production stood up, the quicker I can recover if there's an incident. And all of those equate to time and money, right? You consolidate the tool sets, you consolidate the operations teams with the dev teams and the security teams. They all come together as one to move this stuff through fast. Remember, when we talk about automation, to me, it's synonymous with speed, and you can only go so fast in this world depending on how complex your system is. So to be able to get things into production quicker has really meant a lot of time and money to our customers in the field.
Good point. Any other thoughts, guys, on this, or more importantly, how do you think DevSecOps relates to CI/CD? Because many of the stages there are part of the CI/CD kind of continuous integration, continuous delivery process. How do you see DevSecOps playing or relating to that? Hughes, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think CI/CD is definitely a critical aspect of, many organizations' successful implementation of DevOps and DevSecOps is leveraging these technologies via CI/CD pipelines to deliver, updated code and updated capabilities and updated functionality in that automated fashion. A lot of organizations are leveraging CI/CD pipelines to facilitate that, and I think that's definitely critical to achieving the goal of DevSecOps, basically.
Cool. Any thoughts there, AJ?
Yeah, I think that's where it all comes together, I believe. That's where you have all of these opposing forces that are typically opposing. They're not supposed to be, but they feel opposing when you're in an organization where you have developers, operations, and security. And this is where it all happens. This is where you kind of bring them together, and you can get everybody can obtain value from having DevSecOps in the CI/CD pipeline, where in other areas, a developer is not going to see a ton of value in a compliance report. They're just not, right, at the end of the day. And an operator is not going to feel like they should sit in a board meeting explaining what they do. But that's what these other areas have to do, right? But I think in the CI/CD model, when we talk about DevSecOps, all of these opposing forces that we see come together, and they can bring, and everybody gets value out of this because it's seamless, it's streamlined, and everybody gets to operate. And we're going to talk about using the same language later, but everybody gets to operate in the environments that they're typically used to operating, and no one really has to change a lot of things. So I see it as, if you're thinking about DevSecOps, you're like, all right, AJ, we have that philosophy down. Now what do we do? This is your North Star, right? Getting to where it's fully baked into your full CI/CD pipeline, so that now when things are being released, when you're getting that application out the door, it's meeting everybody's needs from the operations, developers, and security perspective.
Very good point. Medina, any thoughts there?
No, I think they said it well.
This covered it. I have one question for you then. What do you think is the state of affairs of InfoSec? What's on top of mind? What are some of the difficulties that the information security teams are facing in kind of today's tumultuous multimedia, front issues with all that is going on there?
So again, going back to what I was saying before, in this dance that we do, I think top of mind for most is the speed to which they can get things implemented or shore up any leaks that they have. And so it's really, to me, more, again, an art, right? Because you're going to take what you see at the gateway, and I've had a lot of interesting, very energetic conversations about the philosophy of it's an edge thing. No, it's a client thing. No, we got to figure this out somehow, and nary shall the two meet. But if you can bring it through, number one, have a baseline of what you see, understand who's knocking at the door, and then constantly keep your security updated, what better way than to pull the mundane out of creating that baseline deployment as you move that stuff left, right? We didn't have the opportunity to do things as code before. It was very manual. I'd get my list of CVEs. I'd have to manually go in and check everything. And that's not where I want to live. And that's really today, from a customer's perspective. And you see people voting with their feet. Like, I didn't sign up to, check CVEs all day. I want to code something. I want to create and make feature functionality. So to be able to pull the mundane out of this, if you have that list and you create this declarative language that you can not only like put into your CI/CD, but you can develop and test as you move along that pipeline, and deploy it, is really pretty exciting, because then it's the ability to say what if, right? How creative can you be? If I can do this, why can't I do that? If I've got this environment, why couldn't I do it in another environment? It's limitless in the possibilities, and so it just lends itself to, this is like the natural progression of where security would go.
Yeah, great point. In terms of security, this is one kind of our understanding and belief that there's a delicate balance necessarily between speed and security. Do you agree that there's this consistent kind of battle or need for balance being weighed for one versus the other? And what does it mean for organizations? What AJ, why don't we start there? Do you think there's this balance of the ability to one versus the other? How's that?
I think that's the old school. I was going to say monolithic, but I don't think that applies here. I've just been thinking so much about other stuff. That's the old school thought of security and development, is that it's going to slow you down. But I think with the acceleration of the technologies that we have, and then the realization that deploying unsecure code into an application is going to slow you down dramatically more than meeting some gate earlier on in the process. So I think you're still going to run into it. I run into it. I'm sure both the Chris's run into it all the time, where you meet somebody and you're like, yeah, well, I just got to focus on growing the business. I got to focus on this. I can't invest in this right now. But I'm starting to see a shift where folks realize it's important to get this done now, regardless of the size of their organization or the maturity of them. They realize that you save time, you save money, you save reputational damage if you do consider security early on. Now, that's where the philosophy comes in, right? This is where the DevSecOps philosophy comes in, because if your engineers are actually thinking about security because you are implementing this DevSecOps mentality, it's not going to be seen as a blocker. It's just a part of the gates that they're going through when they're doing things. And it's not something that's, oh, this is slowing me down. So that's where I think this is something that we're starting to see a shift, but you still hear the argument, well, security is going to slow down the business or whatever it may be. And I think it's the opposite. If you don't consider security early on, you're going to slow down later. You're going to run into issues later that are going to cause way more delays, time, et cetera, and a lot of money as well.
So Hughes, do people run away when they see, security guy coming in?
I think they definitely do in some cases, depending on the organization and the way security is approaching things, right? We have some innovative organizations who approach security totally different than way that, that legacy organizations and legacy tooling may do. And it's a lot more collaborative. Something that AJ mentioned is like, being an enabler. And I think this is where it's important to have security integrate with existing developer workflows. I kind of have this ongoing debate right now on LinkedIn about, there's always a focus on reducing friction from the security perspective to enable developers. But I think some friction, some resistance, some stress is healthy, right? To ensure that what we're introducing, what we're implementing aligns with the organization's risk tolerance, right? But once you integrate with existing workflows for developers and organizations, it becomes a lot less of a tedious and kind of a cumbersome process. It kind of integrates with the way they currently do things, and it makes it a lot more easier for them to continue to move at the speed they want to move while having those security assurances and checks in place and letting them do what they want to do. This is where you start to see the shift of conversation, start to call security implementing guardrails, right? You want to have guardrails so people can go fast, but they can't go off the road and just run off the side of a cliff, right? They can go fast, but there's some controls, there's some rigor, there's some control in place, right, to keep them on the path they need to go securely.
It's a great point. Great point. Chris, I think you have a story where you see speed, security, and what's the other one? Cost. I think if there's
Oh my gosh, I can't believe these guys didn't bring it up. The both of them, as many times as we talked about it, it's speed, security, and price. Pick two, right? You can't have your bread and butter at the same time. It's wow. And this is from my perspective, I say this is a higher level, right? When you hit the C-level conversations, and we're talking about this because everybody knows security, and the philosophy of security is going to be based around how you value that particular data or what it is that you're doing in those transactions. So the lesser you value that particular part of whatever said data, those particular things against these other things, you're going to build more security and security practice around the stuff that's more valued. And that costs money, right? And a lot of times, more times than I'd like to reconcile with, it's been about, hey, you know what? I've got this pot of money. I've only got so much to spend, and I want to spend more on this side than I do on that side. So, but speed is always at top of mind. And I don't think the four of us would be here having a conversation without the topic of speed, because automation is, like I said, all about speed. So, and how you do that, how you employ it, depends on how fast you can go, right? We call it velocity, or the rate at which you can develop and then get into production. How fast you can get that is the velocity, and to be able to implement the three of them in a good, timely way. But it's never that way, ever, right? I'm going to spend more at the edge. No, I'm going to spend more on the client. No, I want to spend more on my security consulting guys like Chris and AJ to get in here and help me build out the framework. It's a huge factor in what it is that we do.
Yeah, that's true. So we did a survey back in early 2020, I think, where we talked about to InfoSec professionals. And there's a couple of findings that I want to share with most here and get your feedback and your thought here. We talked about that pace of delivery that Medina just mentioned. So we asked companies, how does the involvement from the security team impact the pace of the software that is delivered from the organization? And from the people that have adopted some level of DevSecOps practices, 47% say that they feel that they've been faster in delivery, while non-adopters feel that they've been slower. So essentially what it means is that there's a perception, an incorrect perception, that security slows you down. Those that have adopted can clearly see that they believe that it's now helping them be a lot faster. Do you kind of agree with that, Hughes?
I do. And I think this comes back to what AJ, myself and Chris were also talking about a moment ago, which is like the integration into existing developer workflows and leveraging automation. When you do that, it allows speed to continue on, and it helps facilitate that velocity. When you stick with legacy approaches to security, for example, you may be going really fast and then you hit the security team and like things come to a grinding halt. So integrating with the, DevSecOps and using the modern practices and tooling to facilitate that velocity is probably why you're seeing those positive, reactions from the team that have done DevSecOps and implemented automation and things of that nature. So it can help facilitate it when done correctly. And I think that's what this is showing here.
Yeah, AJ, you were smiling when you look at the slide. So any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's the age-old kind of story about security. Once you start to think about it and incorporate it, you realize, oh, this isn't that bad. But before, you're like, oh, this is the worst thing ever. And I think Chris, you said something interesting on the last slide about guardrails. And I think that's why when you get this DevSecOps mentality, you're able to still move fast and you feel like you're able to do things, because we're not stopping you. We're just going to make sure nothing bad happens. We're going to make sure if you go that way, you bounce back a little bit this way. And I think this is the message that I think I often see when companies start to realize, okay, I'm going to take this seriously for whatever reason, they get a breach or whatever it may be. They realize, oh, wow, this is what I was avoiding. This is it. This is all I was avoiding. And they realize it's an improvement to them. And I think something also that I believe Chris Hughes mentioned as well, of what we're talking about here, automation and using the tools to do that. It's a concept that we talk about in the course I teach, but it's like living off the land. In compliance, we should try to live off the land. We should really try to use the tools that our people are using, our administrators are using, and then let them administer them. That makes things a lot easier, allows them to move faster. You go to your engineers or your operators and say, hey, I got this DevSecOps thing, but here's 7 new tools you got to learn. They're going to run away from you. They're not going to be interested in doing that. But you can find out, what are the tools you currently use? Okay, there's this one tool that if we get, it incorporates with all these tools. I'll give you a script and all you have to do is run it and we're good to go, and I'll get all my compliance reports. They're going to like that a lot more than having to install a bunch of tools. So I think that's why we see this slide, is because when you do adopt it, it's about, let's make your life easier, but also keep the company secure, which allows them to move fast. They don't have to even think about security no more, because we've done a lot of the work up front to protect them. So I love this slide as well. There's a lot of great slides you all have that I think are like great slides to help me just grow my business.
Great point. So Medina, I asked you about the benefits of DevSecOps, and we asked the same question to the CSOs and CISOs out there. And so what are the benefits of implementing DevSecOps practices in their software development lifecycle? Here's the results, right? Improving efficiency in audits, reducing the risk, and greater agility. So I think it counters all the perceived, predefined perceptions that security slows things down. It's very efficient, it secures, obviously, and it provides some level of agility there. And then ultimately, cost savings is like the last end of the scale there. But interestingly, that increased innovation is also an aspect, because I guess teams are working together and there's a synergistic effort when you work with different disciplines. You have a compliance officer, you have a security professional, and you have an operations team come in together and have those discussions. How do you see that kind of distinction in playing areas, different areas working together, Chris?
See, when that is an interesting looking statistic right there. So one of the things that we haven't said so far, which I think we probably should just put out on the table here, is that security forever has always been thought of insurance, right? It's just like insurance. Nobody wants to pay for it, right? But I know I need to have it, because it's that one thing AJ said. It's like, for whatever reason, they've taken interest in it. Usually it's a breach or maybe some sort of data leakage, and now they've equated it, somebody has come back and equated it to how much money they've lost, and they're like, well, I should have invested in my insurance plan with BiteCheck. They should have built me out a framework so I didn't I should have invested in them to do these things. And you need, like, right up front, you need to have a good consultant team come in here and build out a good workflow, a good practice around what you're doing from a security perspective. So no one typically is going to think of security as being innovative. It's more of a what do I know and how do I lock it down? But in terms of being innovative, if they are, they're not telling you, right? Because if I've got some tricky way to put out some honeypot that draws in bad guys who are looking for my stuff, or I can create some, a better mousetrap, right? I'm not going to tell you about it. So it's there. I think this percentage number is probably hiding a lot more than what people would tell you, because security people often won't tell you what it is that they're doing anyway.
Yeah, very good point. So I have one of the best anecdotal stories that I've heard recently. And Chris Hughes, you tell me, what is the analogy that you use when you talk to about your kid's room, and how does it relate to audits?
Yeah, I was hoping to see this slide because it's pretty much like the best analogy I've come across this year around compliance and security is, I have 4 kids now, and, we were talking about this slide once in the past, and compliance is always a snapshot in time. Like it's the same thing with my kids. If I tell them, hey, go clean your room, I'm going to come check in 30 minutes. It better be clean. And then I come in, it's super clean. But as soon as I walk away, this is what it looks like about 5 minutes later. Same thing with compliance. The way we typically do compliance and security is like, we have a snapshot in time. Things look good. Okay, everyone's been working real hard, get everything tidied up, cleaned up, secure, where it should be, got all their paperwork completed, et cetera. But then as soon as the compliance, kind of assessment period is over, it looks like this again. And that's inefficient. Your adversaries, they don't operate in a snapshot of time. They operate at all times. So you need to have this continuous assessment model, continuous security model in place to ensure that things are always tidy, things are always secure, things are always hardened the way they should be. And that's why I love that analogy, is because the traditional way we do compliance and security is just inefficient and it's not working. And we need to modernize.
It's a great point. I'll write a blog about it. You should write a blog about it. It's a really kind of down to earth, really, any of those that have kids can totally relate to that. Even teenagers like I do can totally relate to that. Or start looking under the covers, then you'll see where all the hidden skeletons and all the busted stuff is located, right? So now to someone else's favorite slide, and AJ, why do you like this slide so much?
I think it accurately depicts the problem with compliance. We get these reports and they show that for every second of the year, for the past year, everything was amazing. And the way that was identified was through screenshots. So we took manual evidence and we said it applies across this entire time frame, when everyone that works in this field understands that the right graph is actually what happens, especially in the cloud. You can create an S3 bucket with about 3 words in the CLI. You can do really bad things with a few more words on the AWS CLI. It doesn't take a ton of work to spin up a new resource and for things that fall out of compliance. And if you're a startup or a growing company, you're hiring people like crazy. Some new people are coming in. They may not enable MFA right away. And the reality is security, compliance, all of this, you're going to do this. You're going to go up and down. It's just the reality of how this stuff works. And the goal of compliance should not be to get the left side of the graph. It should not be to get a clean report. The goal of compliance should be able to tell management what's going on so they can go make a better business decision. I think compliance has a bad connotation because everyone sees just that left side of the graph. But if we peel it back and think about what is actually compliance, what are controls? A control is just a risk mitigation activity. It's you are doing something that's going to mitigate a risk. So a compliance assessment is coming in to see, are you doing these things consistently to mitigate a risk? And yes, you may have some really cool stuff in place, but the reality is at times you're going to need those systems to either trigger and auto remediate or scream at someone via an alert to tell them to go fix those things. And I think internally, I get the need for a formal report externally for business and to get that out there. And you don't want that necessarily to look all jacked up, like your system's all jacked up, because you probably won't be able to grow your business. However, internally, you should be looking at your compliance assessments. And if you get one of those graphs that say we've been good forever, your eyes should perk up, because we all know that that's not the case. So I think this is a perfect depiction of actually going on. So how do we make sure that when these dips happen, someone knows, or it's automatically fixed, or whatever it is that you want to do in your kind of treatment plan there. But let's think about reality. This is not real that compliance is going to look like this for 12 months, which most of these assessment frameworks go. I think it's a perfect slide. I think this is the reason why most engineers, operators, folks hate compliance, is because the auditors actually believe that the left side is true, and they know what's going on is actually on the right side of the slide.
Chris, you were grinning there when JJ was saying. So, do you have any thoughts here? I got a couple of questions, if you don't, regarding this or regarding audits in general. But
are you asking the Air Force guy or the Navy
guy? I'm asking the Navy guy. Yeah.
This is funny. I like this. This is one of my favorite slides too. But I feel like this is like the engineering slide, and it's no different than the sea level slide that you had before this one, which explains it in a little bit more layman's terms for them to get. But yeah, this is he did it right on the mark. This is a great way to depict this. I think if you can get, and then the whole reason behind automation, which I think we're going to get to here in a second.
Yeah, the interesting thing about audits too is that, correct me if I'm wrong, right? Is that you're only looking at a subset too. You're only looking at a little section of the population of what is your reality, and assuming that okay, everything else is because this little sliver is cool to go. All the rest is as well because it should follow some level of standardization across the board. And is that really true, Hughes? Do you see that?
No, I actually was shaking my head when you said that because it's like AJ said, screenshots, and typically they do what's just like a statistical sampling of certain subset of the systems, right? And assume if these are good, then everything else is good. And often there's a little bit of negotiation, like okay, test these systems, and then those systems are definitely the ones that are going to be tested, and get those hardened, get those good, get those secure. And that's just inefficient. Like I said, the adversary, it's not just a snapshot in time. It's not just a sampling of your system. It's your entire environment. And that's why you got to lean into automation and cloud native technologies to make sure that your entire environment, not just a sample of your environment, is compliant and secure at all times. Not just a snapshot in time, not just a subset of systems, but at all times in all systems. Obviously, like AJ said, it's never going to be perfect. That's just the nature of our career field in IT. But you definitely want to try to even out that line more so than having those drastic, peaks and valleys essentially.
We should talk about what makes those dips too, Alan, right? Because the slide on the left shows you where they flow down, and that's a large.
And that's the perception, right? That's the perception that oh yes, because I'm compliant at this stage, my compliance state will remain the same. I think AJ mentioned that, but in reality, what happens, right, is when changes occur within your environment, within your systems, new things are added, things are modified, that when it's dipped. What else kind of helps impact that, Medina?
Yeah, how fast are we making changes in the environment, right? We're constantly updating our phones. Production, so development wants to make changes, would make changes every hour if they could. But the reality is, these points in time are audits, and audits, depending on how big your enterprise is, can take forever. So if you've got a CI/CD pipeline that's building stuff at a blinding rate of the speed of market, then you're constantly changing that environment just over and over, and it's the headache gets worse, right? Because you've got different infrastructure, you got different applications, you got different code builds, you've got all the sprawl that happens with your configuration management and your configuration specifications, as Gardner would like to call it. So to be able to catch that point in time, and I don't know anyone, at least my perception of in my 27 years, when the morning meeting happens with the CISO, they're going to ask, what is my risk rate right now? What's my risk factor look like, right? And so the team has to be able to respond and tell him where he's vulnerable or she's not compliant. It's got to be there every morning, and it's a constantly happening thing. So
yeah, we talk about continuous compliance, which is the ability then through automation to really reduce the cycles times that it takes. On average, our survey also showed that an audit takes 2 months to complete. So by automating that and making it more frequent throughout the process, you're able to shorten those periods of compliance verification to where it's almost a straight line because it is continuously validated and maintain continuous compliance there too. So we'll get in a little bit more detail about that in a few minutes. But the next slide, I like, we mentioned it earlier, but different teams have different languages with different tools. And it speaks a little bit to that conflict that we typically see or historically have seen before this advent of this DevSecOps practice, where compliance has a stack of, procedures and policies and things that you need to check off and follow. Security will have a set of validation tools to scan and make sure the systems are the way they are supposed to be, and they'll hand it off to dev or ops teams and say, okay, here, make sure the systems follow this. And so this mix of different tools, different responsibilities, and the translation time alone that it takes from one tool to another can be mind-boggling, can be very time-consuming, very manual, very painful in a way. So do you see this in reality out there? Why don't we start with you, Hughes? Do you see this kind of different languages, different tools, different kind of conflicting interests there?
Yeah, I definitely do. And this is why I kept stressing like integrating into existing workflows and breaking down silos is because like not only do you see different languages and terminology and way of operating, but you also see almost like an adversarial relationship between the teams. Like it's always the devs or it's always security, like, you know, with X, Y, and Z. And that you need to bring these teams together and working towards like a unified goal, unified, you know, business outcome that they're trying to support and kind of break down those barriers between those teams to help facilitate that collaboration is where we need to head, in my opinion.
Yeah, AJ, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is like the core of the problem, and I see it often. And the way that I can tell that this is going on is when I send, you know, whoever it is at the organization who's responsible for compliance some information, and I can see the email chain when I get a response. They just forward it off to someone. They didn't even consider what I said. Had no clue. You know, I'm asking about change management or something, and it just, hey, so and so, can you answer the below question? And that's because that compliance person truly doesn't even know what is going on in the CI/CD world. They don't even know. They might even know what CI/CD is because they're so far removed from the work, and they speak a different language, like you're saying. Like they're thinking about controls, exceptions, auditors. The developers are thinking about developing. Security people are thinking about protecting the data. And I think when it comes to these different teams, different languages and tools, it's on the compliance side. I don't, you know, most businesses are not in the business of security. There's very few businesses that are in the business of compliance. So if you're a compliance professional, you need to come to the developers, you need to come to the engineers, the operations folks, and speak their language. I think this is, I mean, it's, if you ever been to a foreign country where you don't speak the language and you try to go order food, it's a challenging experience. It's a way you really learn about yourself is when you're out there, truly don't understand what's going on. And I think that's most compliance professionals when we talk about DevSecOps and some of this technology. So I think that does cause a significant issue during this process because the compliance personnel are like, hey, I need information on your firewall. And the engineer's like, we're hosted on AWS. We have security groups. Why are you asking me these questions? Get out of my office. And that happens. And then now there's this adversarial relationship. So the compliance person's too scared to even go there. So the next time this engineer is asked a question, it's from an auditor. And now they're just going to do whatever they can do to get this out. And that's why I think we have to stop thinking about audits. And you mentioned something earlier, Alan, about scoping out audits. Organizations always try to do that. They're always trying to figure out, let's scope this down. That's a phrase I used to hear way too much. Let's scope this down. And it's like, hackers don't scope anything down. They're going to find a way in regardless of what your scope is for your audit. So when we get away, let's just, you know, forget audits. They have to happen. They're going to happen. We all know that, but focus on the security. And that would bring compliance professionals to the table. Because we're just talking about security. We're just talking about operation. We're just talking about the processes that's going on. We're not talking about meeting PCI or SOC 2 or ISO. It's just truly security because all of that other stuff will work out. So I think this is another one of those great slides, but I'm going to put it on the compliance folks. The compliance folks have to come to the table and be willing to learn the languages and tools that security and DevOps are using, or at least be educated enough to have an intelligent conversation.
Oh, great. I have a couple of slides that I want to share with you guys now. And Medina, you helped me out here because I think we have an interesting aspect of the core part of automation. We believe that it is through code. And why do we believe that code is the tool set? Because it enables that continuous compliance, because it's something that is collaborative, is an ubiquitous common language. It is human readable in InSpec. On the right-hand side, you see the sample there. Because it's codifiable, it's scalable, and can be done across different environments. It can be on-prem, it can be in the cloud, it could be even in a Kubernetes check. So it allows you to do a lot across the board. You're able to shift left through the software delivery process incorporating everybody in that process. And ultimately, it provides you this continuous visibility because it is reportable, it's scalable, and it can cover your entire environment. Especially, why do you think, Chris, that code or compliance as code is so important?
You know, I had a customer meeting the other day, and the engineering team was on, and they were a little bit finicky. And one of the questions that came from that team was, "Well, I've been doing Nessus scans, and I've got SCAP scanning, and I, have a good understanding of, how to install the latest from CISA and get a reading back on what it is that I see. Why would I want to do this? What's the point in shifting left when I have a good security practice going?" And the answer was pretty straightforward and simple to me, but it's difficult to couch in those meetings, which is, hey, let's talk about the maturity of where you are, especially if you are doing DevOps. The maturity of that pipeline really can be based on how well you build a security practice and how well and how fast you can deliver code that's in line with the compliance team. So when you look at this piece of code, here's a great example to the right. This is just straight code that you'd use to build out security policy as code. And it's very descriptive, right? It tells you what control. We've got a package here that we want to do. And let's see, we're going to do not install Telnet server, right? See, this is very easy to read. It tells you the impact level. It tells you exactly what it's doing, where it came from. These are the guidance levels. Here's where you would get this and how it would pass an audit. This is straight up. The actual piece that's working here is at the bottom. Just describe the package at Telnet D and say it should not be installed and come back and give me a reading on that. That's just number one, having this in front of an auditor to AJ's point, right? They're not necessarily speaking the language of operations and or real security maybe, but they don't necessarily understand the code, and this is super easy for them to understand. So you see things like this implemented, it cuts audit times in half, which can go on for days or weeks, even months sometimes. So it begged me not to respond to the customer, but and put it in so many words that, hey, look, it's one thing to be able to scan your environment and get something back. There's a number of architectures that can prohibit that from happening. But rest assured, if you can take the code that you have, build it in anywhere, and be able to use it anywhere, look at the agility that you've created for the company. Look at the probably time and money spent on, saving all the stuff that you've been doing in multiple different types of environments, which we all know we need, right? There's never going to be one single environment. AJ talked about monolithic. I think he was probably doing an app migration somewhere, but it's those types of things that keep us on-prem. So you have those hybrid environments where you're trying to get to cloud, and having this as code is the quickest, simplest, most risk-free way that you can get yourself there and your agency there.
Yeah.
And
cool.
I think, sorry, go ahead, Alan.
No, go
I
ahead.
just say with this code, I think this is the power. You can see right there, PCI, HIPAA, NIST. We're checking 3 different frameworks with one set of code here, like one little class or whatever we're going to call this here, right? That's the power where if I'm an auditor and I see this, it might look foreign to me when I first look at it and I get scared and run away. But when I come back and I see this, I'm like, oh, wow, I just tested PCI, HIPAA, and NIST all at one time, and I'm doing it in an automated fashion. This is why we should do this, because there's a lot of enterprises, especially the larger ones that, both Chris's, Alan, we all know this, they're doing multiple frameworks. They're not doing just one. They're not just doing PCI. They have all of these many requirements to meet. And if you think about the way that audits have traditionally been done, you have your PCI auditor, your HIPAA auditor, your NIST, your FedRAMP guys, your SOC 2 folks, ISO, all these different auditors. And the people that are getting the worst part of this aren't the compliance professionals. That's their job. The internal auditor is supposed to coordinate with the auditors. They're cool with that. That's fine. That's how they make their money. But the engineers are collecting information that they don't have a Telnet server installed 30 times for 30 different auditors. And that's not what anybody wants to do. They want to be out building. And this is where it gets into that speed versus security thing, especially when we talk about compliance, because there's so much wasted effort. And using unambiguous language like this, using language that all of us can understand and implement, it reduces that time, because most of these compliance frameworks are saying the same thing. I'll be the first to tell you, they're all going to repeat themselves. It's just a matter of who you're paying. We're going to tell you to do vulnerability scans. You're going to have to do a pen test, make sure the right people have access, make sure you onboard and offboard people the right way. They all say the same stuff. So when we come to that agreement, now it's like, how do we make sure we get the maximum value out of one piece of evidence? How do we make sure we can use that one piece of evidence across multiple frameworks? And this is, I think, this slide, and with the code there, you can just see 3 frameworks right there. And then you even have a CIS reference in there. That's powerful from an audit perspective and a compliance perspective. And this is, I think, the future. This is what we have to get to, because no organization is trying to comply with one framework. And like you said as well, Chris Medina, multiple different types. There's different operating systems. I can't remember the last time I came across like 100% Windows or 100% Linux. You're seeing Linux, Windows, you're seeing virtual machines, containers, little serverless here. There's just all kinds of stuff going on in these organizations that you have to have some kind of central way of collecting this information, because if not, you're going to ask for 5 different types of things. You're going to wonder, how are they doing security across those 5 different things? It's going to be different pieces of evidence. Or you can just use this one set of language that allows you to do that continuous compliance management.
And how easy would it be to take the output from this? It's a 2-liner, right? Really. You take the output from this and pipe it into what you already have, right? You don't have to rip and replace stuff. And you've built yourself a good practice. I'm going to take the output of this. I'm going to give it to, whatever automated, tool set I have to make the changes, or I'm going to give it, to my security team and let them do what it is that they do. And away you go. And you're bound to do some good stuff when you're building out a practice like that.
Yeah, Medina, you're kind of alluding to this kind of new, what we call the human free zone. Chris, Medina, why don't you walk us through this? And I'm going to ask Hughes on the latter part of this. What do you think about human free zone as a security model? But Chris, why don't you walk us through this?
Yeah. So this is really good. I like this. I call this the secure supply chain of code, right? And everything is as code as we see it today. I mean, you're building it on infrastructure probably somewhere. It's just the cloud is someone else's computer, right? But as you're deploying it, you can see where we're employing practices where humans don't have to touch the stuff, right? Because we are the weakest link in any type of black and white scenario. If we're doing zeros and ones, and we're allowing there to be no errors, then we put these things in source code management, right? You have version control, and we send it through the pipeline. Now in this particular picture, we've got the hooks in here to allow for certain rules that happen in security, right? You've got 2-person rules that say, hey, I need to be able to control, I need visibility, and I want to understand what's happening throughout this pipeline. Maybe it's broken, maybe it's not. Automation is very scary to me because, you flip it and it's either done or it isn't. And I've been breaking production forever. But in this case, we send it through each particular stage. There's a stopgap here where it's looking for input, and this could be piped out to whatever. It could be looking for, a ServiceNow response or some type of email response, whatever it is. And it looks for input before it takes on to the next stage. So we get into testing and it goes through those. But literally you could automate this entire process. No one touches it. And if it passes the criteria of what your security policy should be, when it gets into production, it should be clean, right? You're building out products that are aligned and compliant with your security policies. So this is a fantastic way of building in that zero trust workflow that a lot of people are looking for today.
It's a great point. So, Hughes, is this a secure model? Do you think security professionals believe in this? Okay, if automation is the way to go for security?
I think it depends on the security professional. Like obviously we have three of us on the line who seem to think that that's the case, right? This is the direction we need to go. But you know, a lot of the things we talked about all kind of tie together. Like one aspect AJ brought up is, you know, kind of the lack of knowledge and even skills in some cases among the compliance workforce when it comes to modern technologies, cloud native environments, automation, CI/CD pipelines, DevSecOps. So we need to bring that workforce along with us and help them understand the value of moving to this new paradigm. And that's kind of where they'll get on board with this, is when they understand how things are working, how all these things tie together, and why you can be trusted, and why it's even better than the traditional way we do things in many cases. And you know, I've heard some proponents, you know, kind of or I'm sorry, I should say like people that are anti to this approach is say like, well, you can't automate all the controls, or everything can't be put in code. And that's right. Maybe not everything can, but if you've ever done this kind of work, even doing a large subset of that into code and automation is an incredible win. And it can save so much time and provide so much more continuous monitoring, continuous security. So I think it's a multiple, you know, factors at play from technology perspective, as well as from the workforce perspective, and bringing people along. And that said, you know, maybe you won't have a total human-free zone. I've worked in some very, you know, environments around national security in the DoD, for example, and you may need a human gate for depending on if it's a weapon system or things of that nature. But that doesn't mean for everyone. Like some systems, you know, definitely can be fully automated. So it's just kind of unique to each situation, each environment, and what their, you know, kind of their risk tolerance is.
Yeah, no, and we account for that in terms of human approvals in that model as well, because we believe that there are, you know, stages or gates that need to be validated by a human being. It's just that the matter that we believe is that once you set those controls, and once it's human free zone, if there's a human interaction where it's not supposed to be, that's a red flag, right? That's a major issue that you need to make sure you're secure, because you're not supposed to be there. What the hell are you doing, right?
Yeah, and it goes back to, I was just going to say real quick, it goes back to what Chris Medina said too. If it's the codification of everything, if it's in code, there's no kind of human subjectivism that's in play there. Like, you know, this is what it is. This is what it was assessed as. There's no subjectivity there. You know for sure that what is being assessed and evaluated aligns with exactly what's being seen.
Yeah, that single source of truth, and that becomes ubiquitous. Everybody agrees that this is what we're saying. This is what we want, and it goes forward. And there's no, you know, ifs, ands, or buts about it.
I think some of the pushback, sorry, go ahead. I think some of the pushback when some people see human free zone, they're like, oh, you're going to take my job. It's like, no.
Skynet, yeah. Skynet's going to come in.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, oh, you're trying to buy a tool to replace me. And that's not the case, especially not in security. What I think most organizations are trying to get back to are the security professionals thinking, doing what they hired them to do, which is critically think, assess threats, stay up to date with what's going on, and be able to be a little bit more proactive. Most security programs are reactive because you have way too many humans involved, doing manual tasks repeatedly. So now they're just, instead of your SOC analysts actually doing some triage and some incident response and some forensics, they're sitting there, you know, making sure people have MFA enabled all day. That you're literally paying someone $100,000 a year to make sure people have MFA when you could probably do something programmatic to fix that. And I think that's the piece that senior leaders need to push down, because you're going to get that pushback from the teams. I don't want to implement a tool because that's what I do every day. But it's even what we're talking about here, this isn't going to cause a developer to lose their job. It's going to allow that developer to innovate even more. I think that's when we get back to that stat that you mentioned earlier of increased innovation, because they're getting more time. You give a developer some time, you're going to get something. It might not be great, but you're going to get something. You're going to get something from them, right? Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, value, right? Their value work is going to be increased. It's not this mundane audit responses to audits, you know, and getting reports back and so on. So automation, why does it matter?
Yeah, I think for two reasons. One, it's way too hard in modern environments to do a manual audit. I think if you're doing a manual compliance assessment, you're guaranteed to miss things. It's just the organization's environment sprawl way too far out. There's way too many resources out there. There's way too much going on. Like we said, there's this constant up and down. So if you're just asking for screenshots at the end of 12 months, I can't buy that we actually know what's going on. So I think automation allows you to see more on a continuous basis without needing to hire a bunch of people. The other aspect of that I think is really important, and I think currently in the compliance space, we're not getting technically accurate evidence. I think auditors are producing reports, internal compliance personnel are giving senior leaders information to make business decisions, and it's not from accurate info because we are doing it manually, because we're grabbing screenshots, because we're just pulling all this stuff in an ad hoc manner instead of doing it continuously, instead of actually hooking into systems and seeing what's going on a regular basis. So now the downstream impact of that is an organization says, oh, we're actually fine on patching. There's nothing wrong with our patch management process. And there's these machines out there that literally have never reported to your patch management server or whatever it may be. So you don't even know what's going on. But hey, you got the pretty report that says everything looks good. So I think automation is needed to get us technically accurate info. The whole point of this is to reduce management's uncertainty. And when making those decisions, you can't do that with bad info. Bad inputs get bad outputs, and automation allows us to change the inputs that are coming into the compliance process and produce things that are accurate, that I actually can see. And maybe at first, automation is not going to show you that you're 100% compliant like you saw before, but you're going to know where those skeletons are. You're going to be able to see where are the gaps in our process, and then how do I automate that on top of it to make sure that that doesn't happen again. So I don't see a way in the next few years how we can do compliance without automation, just because of the nature of these environments. It's almost impossible to do that in an accurate manner. You can get a report, guaranteed. I promise you that can happen. But what that report's going to say, is it going to actually reflect your environment? I don't think so without automation.
Mm-hmm. Hughes, any thoughts there? Why does automation matter?
Actually agree with everything AJ said. It's kind of what we mentioned earlier, is removing the subjective nature of the assessment and audit process and getting this verified, automated output that is the kind of the source of truth. And then also there's a workforce factor. Like we're simply not going to have the workforce to allow the level of velocity that we need for organizations to have that velocity and competitive differentiation, get to market faster, et cetera, address things quicker without automation. So you have to have automation.
Mm-hmm. Any downsides to automation, Medina?
Downsides. Well, I mean, there's the obvious ones, right? When you're directly connected into certain things and you're making changes on the fly, you've got, configuration sprawl and some of the scripts that you're running. There's certain things that you just naturally have to be aware of and be disciplined on. But I'd bring one extra element into this, which is, hey, when you employed automation in the first place, it was to go fast. It was to take the mundane, going back to what AJ said about the previous slide, the mundane tasks, right? I'm not looking to take away anybody's job. I'm looking a way to get rid of all the mundane stuff that you didn't want to do in the first place. And that's where we get weak, right? Because we get used to doing or seeing certain things. It's very mundane and we might miss it. I think SolarWinds is a good example of that, right? Where we just get used to a process flow when we pull stuff down and we don't do simple things just like checksums, it's just mundane. The other element that this brings is scale, right? Because what Chris just said, when these, it's not just about, the 5 or 6 Commodore 64s you got plugged up in your, basement. It's about these huge, multi-cloud environments of, hundreds of thousands of servers doing, completely different things, and being able to scale that vast, enterprise and get you back something that's coherent, right? That you can verify. Hey, I'm checking Telnet D on all of these systems. How am I going to do that? I don't have a workforce that's going to be able to check 100,000 systems in a timely manner, right? So I can go off and get them, but how much is that going to cost me? So you're weighing the pros and cons there, but scale is a huge part of why automation is important in terms of security and verification. Whether or not there's bad points to it, there can be a case made for some, but I would say large in part, the pros outweigh the cons every day of the week.
Yeah, I think that's a great point from the scalability perspective that resonates to me also, but not just in preparation. We're talking a lot about precursor efforts, right? But the level of automation can also allow you to have a reactive or a proactive approach in terms of, okay, there's this CVE, let's go out and check, let's go out and validate at an exponentially faster way that you couldn't do it otherwise. Oh my gosh, okay, let's go check server by server by server. If you can do that scan across the board, across your platforms, across your entire environment, very efficiently at a scale, that helps you protect your environments as well. So I totally agree with you. I think automation is how you do it. Will differ, I think. It's just a matter of you have to start somewhere. And we believe that through DevSecOps practices and principles and tools, you're able to truly have that cohesive team, same language, same tools, same understanding, same agreement, but ultimately you're able to have this approach, whatever tool you use, to automate, to scale, to protect your environment. Any closing thoughts? I think we're going to leave it with this last slide, but any closing thoughts on DevSecOps or automation? Let's start with you, Chris Hughes.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, it's a journey. It's not like a destination, right? So you need to start with where you are in terms of your workforce, your technologies that you have in place, the platforms that you're using, and start to innovate and automate from there. You know, it's going to take time, and it's going to take learning along the way. And don't be afraid to make a mistake. You know, it's going to take. You may make a mistake. You have some lessons learned. You implement those lessons learned, and you continue to innovate on that process. But you know, there's no denying that if we want to get to where we want to get with DevSecOps and continuous security, continuous compliance, we have to automate. So definitely start with where you are. You know, look to industry for best practices and guidance, and just go along that journey and have an open mind throughout that process.
AJ?
Yeah, I would say there's a common saying in the space that compliance isn't security, and I agree with that. But security is compliance, and if everyone can just start focusing on security, let's focus on that first. Let's stop thinking about audit, stop thinking about whatever framework you're chasing. Focus on security, and I think that's what's going to help us out as we move forward from a DevSecOps and automation and compliance perspective, because we're just going to change our mindset about this stuff. If you're going into a compliance audit and your number one goal is to just get a report, you're wrong. Your number one goal should be to improve the security of your environment. And the way that you do that is through automation, through continuous compliance. And I would charge, you know, I don't know how many auditors are listening to this, but I hope the auditors start to pay attention. But we really have to get the audit side of the house better, and speaking the same language like we talked about, using tools like Chef Inspect, and being able to understand what's coming out of these tools so that they can make the lives of their lives easier, but also the lives of their engineers easier. So I think it's you know, we have to focus on security. Let's just focus on security. That's kind of the message I hope that everyone heard from this talk, is we're just talking about security. We're talking about doing the right things at an earlier stage, and then you're going to get some of the compliance benefits later on. And I hope that's the message folks take from here, and appreciate the opportunity.
Cool. Medina, closing thoughts?
I get the last word. Well, I would have to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about test, right? Because compliance has two elements. It's the policy by which you're going to create the standard, and then it's the verification, right? And so with automation, you can bring those both together and really do it at scale. And that is simply a test, right? If verification means testing, do testing early, do it often, do it frequently, build it in as early as possible. Even if, you know, you're building out a piece of code, test it against, you know, the latest frameworks, and have an understanding of, you know, how it might be vulnerable, and assess that risk and make sure that it's visible. But testing is important all the way through that process. It's a critical part of building a compliance framework and building security into your practice. And if you have any questions, I've got two great consultants here that can come out and help you with it, that are on the line, and we'll be happy to do that for you and make the plug for them. And I'm always available. Everyone knows where to get me. And thanks, Alan. I appreciate the time today.
Yeah, gentlemen, once again, always very instructive, very enlightening conversation. It more than an hour it's been. So thank you for taking this slide of time. For those listening in, this is Chef Conf 2021. The recording will be aired September 7th through the 9th. So thank you for listening in. If you have any questions, the Chef Slack is the channel to reach to us as part of Chef Conf comments and questions. So once again, AJ, Chris, thank you so much for your time, your insight. I appreciate the time and I look forward to future conversations.
Definitely happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, folks.